Sorry about that. I needed to fix my laptop. It was being weird. But back to chapter 10. It didn't take long for us to reach our destination. A Thunderhawk moves tremendously fast once it's fully underway. The gunships all stayed high on the attack run, knowing the danger of being close to those dense carpets of cover before entering the drop zone and triangulating for the plummet. Awesome. I love how my nose starts to get stuck when I read the story. Without when I just talk. Sweet. Uh, the interior of the interior of the Rhino went dark, lit only by dull combat lumens running along the floor. For the first time, amid all the shaking and roaring, I noticed the patterns running across the metal panels next to me. Very fine scrollwork etched out in gold across the crimson base. It was everywhere, this scrawling, this obsessive decoration. Who would ever see this stuff, save for troops being hurled into their next engagement? Who would even care that it was done? Someone had. Someone had taken time over it. I wondered if I would ever understand it. Then they were in position, and the gunship's nose rose as the retros kicked in. We dropped hard, coming down almost horizontally, and I heard the alarms go off above me as the docking clamp prepared to release. I didn't know they'd do it while we were still airborne, still moving. I assumed we'd set down before they let us go. I was wrong. The surface around me all braced for impact, and then the clamps released. My stomach heaved as we fell out of the sky, making me panic. I had no idea how high we still were before we crashed to the ground with the rhino's tracks already whirring. I was jolted hard, my head flung around painfully before I realized how fast we were already going. I twisted around to the narrow viewport. I saw gunships falling out of the sky in sequence, their drops arrested with sudden flares of smoky flame before their cargo thumped to earth and they ascended again. The tank started firing immediately, igniting the heavy cover around them as they plowed through it. We were already surrounded on all sides by fast-moving transports, tearing up the fronds as they churned hard up the steep slope. Our rhino's gunner started firing its bolter. The wind howled around us as the eerie Xenos landscape kindled and burned. I heard heavier weapons fire from the land raiders, saw the blinding flash of ranked las cannons. As more tanks were dropped into place, the barrage became absolutely furious, a withering rain of projectiles and energy beams that wholesale demolished the terrain ahead of us. I thought nothing could survive it. I thought we'd burn straight to the ridge summit without impediment. Such was the volume of fire. So when the first big impact came, it made me jump out of my skin. The rhino chassis rocked so steeply that I thought we'd be tumbled onto our roof. What was that? Blurted. Xenos, replied Inario grimly, trying to knock us over. What did a rhino weigh? 20, 30 tons? We had momentum too, and powerful engines driving us onward. But something had hit us so hard that we'd nearly been upended. I gripped my restraints harder and tried not to think about it. By then, it was perfectly clear that the run up the slope was not going to be as easy as I thought. The mega arachnids swarmed out everywhere to repulse us, bursting from the burning grass forest, flinging themselves straight at the onrushing tanks. I only caught snatched glimpses of it all, whirling and motion blurred, but it was enough to gauge some of the elements. These were massive creatures, scarcely smaller than the vehicles they attacked, entirely armored in those gray mottled shells and with whirring claws that flickered through the smoke before biting. I saw two Xenos creatures slam into the flank of a land raider just meters away, rocking it off its tracks before carving into its armor. I saw other variants flying in low, their gossamer wings vibrating through the smog in crazy interference patterns. We were hit square on with the rain of bolt shells, blowing them into flying slivers of armor and chitin, but others got through, latching onto the tank columns and gnawing at the outer plates. The charge picked up pace, pushing towards the summit, even as more of the Xenos skittered out of the shadows or swooped down from the storm skirts. Additional gunships hovered overhead, dropping more land raiders into the inferno, then unloading long missile streaks before withdrawing to safety. The press of Xenos became tighter as more and more of them entered the fray, smashing bodily into vehicles before wrapping long segmented limbs around them. That tactic saw dozens of them mown down under churning tracks, but if they penetrated a fuel tank or got into the reactors, then the results were incendiary. Colossal explosions that saw debris flung high into the air. I gritted my teeth. I was very scared, expecting to hear the hard crack of another Xena hitting us at any moment. The surfs around me swayed calmly, weapons in hand, completely unperturbed. About numbers and timing now. The tanks would push as close to the destination as they could, only disgorging their cargo if the charge looked liable to stall. Even within the rhino's reverberating chassis, I could taste the concentration of chems in the air, the accelerants from the bolters, the spent packs ejected from the last cannons. The Blood Angels were unloading furious quantities of ordnance, driving clear avenues up and through the vegetation, blowing apart the racing Xenos bodies as they threw themselves wildly into contact, pushing harder and faster. I, I heard the order to disembark crackle over the comm and realized the moment had come. Not for me, of course, they wouldn't have trusted me to do any actual fighting, but for the hundreds and hundreds of starchy warriors poised to break out. My rhino carried on grinding along even as the transports around me swerved and emptied, spilling marines out into the inferno like chaff leaving a hopper. The volume of range fire then became truly cataclysmic, amplified by Vox challenges as well as masked bolters. I watched Astartes tumble from the still moving tanks, breaking into sprints immediately, firing rapidly but discriminately, swerving through the flickering stalks and bonfires, taking on the screaming mega arachnids as they jerked and scuttled to engage. The killing quickly moved to close quarters blade work, energy fields flaring, flamers exploding, shields thudding. It looked random, confused, absurdly brutal, but it wasn't. Not at all. Even my untrained eye could see how carefully the squads backed up one another. The tanks, having unloaded their contents, stayed with the charge, adding heft to the torrent of shells. Their combined arms swept on up the ridge, taking casualties but never getting bogged down, until we reached the summit and blasted on to the plateau ahead. Only then did my rhino swerve aside, letting the vanguard pull properly away. By then, the numbers landed were striking. I estimated 10,000 infantry deployed, several hundred active tanks. Those huge forces were absolutely necessary. The concentration of Xenos were more numerous still. I adjusted the range of my viewfinder and scanned across the wide plain, boiling with arachnid bodies, gray limbs churning through the flames and smog, all swarming to get to the invaders. Gray silhouettes shuffled out of the gloom, still at distance but closing fast. Enormous constructions with bulbous torsos and spiked limbs, screaming in unison with the legions of lesser creatures at their feet. The weather systems above seemed to be acting in sympathy with them somehow, cracking and blazing as the Xenosaur horde roused itself into feral apoplexy. It was the first truly extensive pitched battle I'd ever witnessed. My last two, maybe. Open ground extended for kilometers ahead of us, almost featureless save for the now flaming forest of grass. It was violence everywhere, horizon to horizon, filling up the viewports and making the tactical readouts fizz from overload. I saw him arrive, though. You couldn't have missed that. He hadn't soared down from the air in splendor, even though he could have chosen to do that. He'd advanced on foot alongside his troops, heading up the slope together with his Terminator armored cherubim. It all looked grand and supremely archaic to me, like an ancient warlord of forgotten terror striding out with his faithful retainers. As the fighting reaches apogee, I noted again the Blood Angel's preference for up-close fighting. They could have opted, I guess, to hang back and let their powerful cannons and bolt guns do the hard work, but they never did. Whenever it was possible to come in tight and shut down space to move, that's what they went for. You could argue that this was the best strategy for dealing with an alien enemy that was incredibly fast over mid-range distances and seemed to be able to evade even well-aimed fire. But I felt there was more to it than that. They liked it better, face to face. They lived for it. The kills meant more if they came with a mix of blood and alien gore swirled across the blade edge and the gauntlet knuckles. These were not conscript soldiers, herded to the front and pressured into doing their bit. These were artisans of violence who lived for nothing else. I'd always found the very notion disconcerting. We were building the very brightest future for all of humanity. But first, we needed to mutilate and gene arrange a few 100,000 of us so that the battles would be over quicker. Still, I couldn't take my eyes off them. They were in a kind of ecstasy, it felt like. They were loving their work. They were hacking, punching, gouging, slashing, going toe to toe with horrors I could barely stand to look at. And they were themselves. No reserved hauteur, no diligent attention to some intricate piece of decoration, just the basics, the raw stuff, what they had been made for, to purify and to transform. That has been our gift. Sanguinius himself had said it, was proud of it, clearly believed it. But I felt then that this was the reality of them, and all that other stuff, all the fine objects and aesthetic labor was just distraction. Not even a mask in that case, not even a mirror, a sideshow, a misdirection. By then, my rhino had come to a full halt, and I got my clear view of Sanguinius. He was he was where you would have expected, right in the center, a bright point of light amid the whirling fire and ash. He was taking on one of the greater clades, a towering Xenos warrior with a spine back and stabbing limbs that the width of a man's torso. Just as at Lilac, the Primarch's bodyguard weren't getting in the way. They had their own battles against the slavering, snickering swarms around them. And so the duel between the masters of twin hordes was exposed. An iron core trying an iron core around which the rest of the slaughter revolved, trying to catch how he did it, how he fought, how he killed. That was hard. Part of it was the speed, the manic velocity of every single movement, a fractured display in the flickering light that seemed more an act of sorcery than physics. Just as before, though, I glimpsed the impossible. impossibility in his movements. We are mortal. We make mistakes. We aim, we miss, we strive, we fail. He never missed. He never failed. And it turns out the human brain doesn't process that very well. We start to try to recategorize it as something else, a machine at work, the operation of a chemical reaction, the effects of gravity. I could barely see any kinship with him at all, not just because he was better, but because he was other. The creature he fought was, by any standard, a formidable opponent. Taller, broader, with four striking limbs as fast as the rest of its kind, as aggressive and free from observable fear. And yet, by the end, I could almost feel sorry for it. Sanguinius was a whirl of gold and red, spiraling into its embrace only to sever tendon, shatter an armored piece, kick out a supporting limb. The Primarch brandished his long spear as if it were an extension of himself, the glittering head swinging like a star against the darkness. He carved into the Xenos, dissecting it even as it howled and shook at him. I could sense the dismay within the alien shell, the gradual realization that it wasn't going to win this one, that this abject fate awaited every single one of its fellow creatures. Maybe it wasn't capable of such imagination. Maybe I was just projecting what I feel. If I were somehow transplanted into that hideous body, but I wouldn't have blamed it if it had started weeping just then. I was close to tears myself, just from witnessing what a farmer could do when the feathers were off. Just as before, I got the clear impression, picked up through the web of thrown blood and core, that Sanguinius was a fraction out of step with everything else. That he pulled raw visions from the future and wound them around himself. What had he made here? What had we let loose? He was on our side, and I should have felt happy about that. But you couldn't be. Not watching what he did when he was given license. None of his gene children would have objected, of course. They were all busy doing the same thing. As far as I knew, I was the only non-Legion member observing all of this at all, the only impartial witness to the wholesale slaughter. Everyone else was getting stuck in it, a part of the process, a cog in the machine. I looked up. I did it mainly to avert my eyes from the scale of butchery just for a moment. I was staring through my helm's magnocular setting by then, the better to scan and pan across the full extent of the bout. It was only as the field of view rose, sweeping over the heads, that I saw that I was not quite the only spectator. The spine of the ridge carried on rising, overhanging plateau slightly as it curved its way through the endless burning jungles. I zoomed in to the limit of my system's capability, but still it was hard to get a clear fix. The entire landscape was on fire, plunging the land into smut-filled darkness and blotting out the milk-white storms above. At distance, all I got was a fuzzy mess as the magnocular's machine spirits attempted to clarify the image. All the same, I picked up something. All I knew it was I thought I did, a single figure set back a long way from the worst of the fighting, flanked by a supporting squad of four. Just like before, I didn't make out any of the insignias, but I could recognize the starties well enough and had a good feeling that whatever else was inscribed over those dark red shoulder guards and he was watching, just like me. No movement, no attempt to assist his battle brothers, just the same intent observation I'd seen in the gunship on my. They are charged with watching over their brothers. What for, though? What could they even see in the maelstrom of heaving bodies? If any lapses of discipline had taken place, couldn't detect them. No one could have done. I turned to Inario. Can you get me up there? I asked. He looked at me as if I'd gone insane. Completely impossible, he said dismissively. He was right. I'd known it as soon as the request had been made. I still might have pressed it though, tried to find some way to get a little closer. The skies hadn't crept apart and blazed with a new fury. Clouds ripped open, severed by hard snarls of teleport beams. Rupturing reality, those were followed by the thunder of fresh airdrops with gunships coming in far closer than before to deposit their deadly cargo. Fucking crap. It was expertly coordinated, the first bruising assault to break the defense lines of the enemy and tie them up in intense fighting so that their uncanny ability to predict incoming assaults would be dented. Then the second wave brought in right on top of the battlefield. The newcomers were clad in pale bone armor with flamboyant topknots and crests on their helms. Their gunships hovered over the plateau, firing constantly while their occupants leapt from the doors, as if they had been doing it for decades. The two forces, crimson and white, hit the already reeling enemy. I heard the serfs around me start to speak urgently into their comm feeds. It was all in Legion Battle of course, so I didn't understand. One phrase stuck out though, since it had been mentioned many times in mission briefings. Even these hardened warriors used to all kinds of extreme experiences were excited about what was happening. I was too. It was the reason I'd come after all, to witness this one individual, the only member of that extraordinary brotherhood to eclipse the angel in prestige. And so I saw him for the first time, dropping like a falling star from his transport, sword in hand, his famous Justarin coming in with him. Horrors, I breathed, watching him crash into immediate action and find his way towards his brother, the War Master. And that's where we will stop.